Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I am your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Gordon Firemark. Gordon is the founder and CEO of law offices of Gordon P. Firemark. With over 30 years of experience as an entertainment attorney, Gordon aids artists, writers, producers, and directors in achieving their goals across theater, film, televisions, and news media. His practical legal counsel ensures clients can make savvy deals, expand their businesses, and thrive in their endeavors. Gordon is also the producer and host of Entertainment Law Update, a podcast tailored for entertainment professionals, and he covers intellectual property, media news, and business matters in the entertainment sector. You can find Gordon on LinkedIn by searching Gordon Firemark or by emailing him at gfiremark@firemark.com or by going to his website, firemark.com. Hello, Gordon. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Well, hi, Olivia. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. You make it sound like I am, in fact, achieving success. So I like it. Thanks for having me.
You definitely are, and you're doing a lot of different things. And I want to dive into really your journey because you also have worked in the law practices and in a lot of different sectors within law.
Yeah.
But you really, through podcasting and seeing the evolution of podcasting, really focus and work with podcasters as well. And there's so much within the podcast sector that I always say is so unknown or people don't have the information relatively available. So I think that's amazing. And I definitely want to dive into that. But before we get started and go down that rabbit hole, I want to start off the show by asking you what success means and looks like to Gordon Firemark.
Well, that is something that has changed a lot over the years for me. I think ultimately success is how each of us chooses to define it. So it's a great question. For me, currently, success is, being able to help people, being able to serve my community, being able to spend time interfacing with creative folks, the podcasters and the filmmakers and theater makers that I love to work with, and supporting my family, of course. And it doesn't have to be supporting them in a very, very high lifestyle, but as long as we're living comfortably without a lot of unmet wants and needs, I think that's success. And ultimately, for me, when on my deathbed, I will say I'm a success if I can say my children and hopefully grandchildren are good people with the right attitudes, the right morals and values, and they also are in this world to help others.
And I love how you really focus in on paying it forward to your community, to your family, and making sure that there's also ethics involved, which I think as a lawyer and really making sure, things are done properly, which you help a lot of business individuals do. And people, again, like I said right before this, individuals who might not know what the right questions to ask to be fully prepared are. And I love that about you and what you're doing. So I want to dive into your journey because you decided to go into law and more specifically entertainment. So how did you decide entertainment law is what you wanted to do? And what has that journey been like as industries have pivoted and moved and are ever
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I love to share my sort of origin story. It starts when I was very little. I was about 5 years old, kindergarten age. And my family, we lived in the Boston, Massachusetts area. And I don't know why I always point to the right when I do. Anyway, we lived in Boston, and I was in a K through 12 school, and they brought the kindergartners in to see a dress rehearsal of the high schoolers' production of the musical Oliver. And I saw the lights go up and the curtains go up and the costumes and everything else, and I knew at that moment that this was for me. This is what I wanted to be a part of. And so I went home afterwards, just glowing with this experience, and persuaded my parents, who didn't take a lot of persuading really, that I wanted to go see more theater and they should take me, and my sisters. And so we did as a family. We would go to theater from time to time. And by the time I was in, I don't know, middle of middle school, so sixth or seventh grade maybe, we had moved across the country, and I had gotten in with a circle of friends that we were getting into some sort of low grade trouble. And the principal of the middle school came, pulled me aside one day and said, "Hey, I've got something for you. I want you to come and run the lights and sound for the school variety show." And there I was back in the theater environment doing this techie stuff. And that really showed me the way. That was the beacon for me for the next few years into high school, where I was the school, the AV club guy, the sound and lighting technician for all the school plays and concerts and things like that. And we had a great program, so it was a real positive learning environment for me there. And into college, I started college as a theater major, and that was mainly for people who wanted to be on stage performing. And I was always behind the scenes. You wouldn't know it now because I'm always on camera in front of people. But back then, it was all about being behind the scenes and just doing my thing. So I didn't want to be on stage performing in plays. So I switched into radio, TV, and film as my major in college. It was my senior year in college when a professor sort of pointed out that I had an aptitude for the business and legal and regulatory side of the industry. And it's a good thing because it turns out I didn't have much aptitude for the creative side. So I was applying to film schools at the time, trying to get into USC Film School and things like that. Didn't get in there, but I did get in. I decided to apply for and got into a few law schools. Didn't think that was necessarily right for me off the bat, but after a year in the hard, cold working world, working in television, there was a strike that hit the industry, similar to the one that we just had last summer. And that was my impetus to, yeah, I think I will do this law school thing. So it was always entertainment first and law was a secondary thing.
I love that how you have been able to combine a passion of yours
Yeah.
with a purpose, right? And that what really excited you and realizations along the way kind of pulled back that curtain a little bit on, okay, this is what I want to do. But also it sounds like individuals going, hey, I think this is what you should get into. I think you would be good at it and enjoy it. And sometimes I think we all need that of we have an idea in our head of what we want to do or the people we should be hanging around with, right? You mentioned that earlier in your story of like, this is my crew. And it's that guiding hand that's saying either I see more for you or this isn't the best decision. Or even in your college years, that curriculum where you said, before I just go down this path, because I want to be on the back end of television and I'm going to continue this theater career, let me acknowledge that I don't want to be on the front, in the scenes. I want to be behind the stage. And this education program is not providing that for me and doing that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I never really thought it out until you started to say it, but I really do have to praise and thank Jerry Evans, that middle school principal, and Deanna Robinson, that college professor who pointed out, who sort of pulled back the curtain, as you said. I think that's really, I owe a lot to them, and I'm very grateful. So thank you for helping me realize that.
Of course. And I think one thing, and this is conversations I have a lot with college students, and it's something you even highlighted, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is the fact sometimes our passion and what we think we want to do long term, like theater and entertainment for you, you see a program in college and you go, okay, I'm going to be part of the theater program. And you start going through it and you go, okay, what it's offering me doesn't align where I want to go career-wise.
Yeah.
Where a lot of individuals I've personally seen get stuck, go, okay, well, now I'm in it, I got to finish. And then I'll figure out my path after that. Or going, okay, well, I could take what they're learning, even though it doesn't fit my out-of-the-box mold, I'll figure out a way to connect the dots myself, where sometimes it's going, okay, what is the other programs offering? And it is okay to switch a major. It is okay to switch a degree or trajectory of your life when you go, how can I connect these things? Where's the missing pieces? Is it something realistically I can fill in on my own? Or are things coming up where I'm going, this degree is going to be better long term?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. I think so much of the decisions we make, especially younger in life, are driven by either our parents telling us what we're going to do, or our parents, our sense of wanting to please parents, or the outside world, and they want us in the box because that's what they know and are comfortable with, and so on. And that willingness to think outside the box, step outside the box, and face what might be some fears is really, I think, that's what drives real success. Is, look, anybody can, go through the motions and do the things and get the corporate job, or whatever it is, and just sort of trudge their way through life and be maybe unhappy, maybe they're outwardly happy, but there's something inside. I think that really what it comes down to is having a willingness to trust one's instincts and trust the gut. And actually, in order to do that, you have to listen to it. You have to actually be willing to hear what your body, your spirit is telling you. And so few people are good at just sort of getting quiet and listening to that. So I think that's really important too. Maybe a little meditation, or at least just, some quiet relaxation and reflection. It's very easy nowadays with screens and everything else to be constantly distracted. And so I would say to anybody who's, wondering at all about their path, stop and listen.
And one thing too you mentioned is how things can ever be changing. And you
Mhm.
just brought that up. And I want to dive into that because the entertainment industry is always changing. And it
Yeah.
has changed so much, even in the past 5, 10 years, with you saw first with Netflix offering streaming service, for example, and then you saw all these other television providers trying to figure out how to align what Netflix is doing to keep clients and customers and shows going. Then you saw the introduction of podcasting and how
Mhm.
that has excelled. So, throughout your career, how have you kind of been on the lookout for what things are changing within the industry so you can help guide your clients?
Well, I have always been a little bit of an early adopter, a little bit of a geek, a little bit of a, hey, if it makes me say gee whiz, that's cool, which is a very nerdy way of saying it. But if that's my reaction to something, I'm going to pay attention to it because I can't be the only one who thinks it. And when I realized, I got started with podcasting myself as a podcaster, um, gosh, 15, 16, 17, early 2000, mid 2000s. And I was asked to be a guest on this thing, and I had to figure out the tech to make it work back then. It's gotten so much easier. It's good, but if I just sort of ignored it, I'd still be doing movie deals. And how many movies have you seen go in the theaters nowadays? It's a very different world. So I'm so glad that I paid attention to this digital technology, and that's really what it is: paying attention. You know, keep your eyes up and looking at what's coming down on the horizon. Um, in your whatever your industry is, and then finding ways, or maybe it's not your industry, but just finding ways to connect it to your industry. Who would have thought, even 10 years ago, or less, that lawyers would be doing television appearances, and from our desks here, mine's in my home office and you're wherever you're. Who would have thought that technology would even exist, much less that lawyers would be using it, or other marketers would be using it as a tool for running businesses and entrepreneurship. And it's just about, I guess, the openness, being ready for whatever comes, and looking at the angles.
And for you, as you just mentioned, you started out as a podcaster, and
Yeah.
now that is a big part of your life, whether
Yeah.
it's through your passion, being a podcast host yourself, being on podcasts like mine,
Mhm.
helping a lot of podcasters understand the legal side and the business side of things. So, what has that journey been like for you with all the different facets? And what are some things that you've learned along the way that you never thought you would pick up on?
That's interesting. Yeah, my journey into podcasting actually started, well, the year that I opened up my own law practice. So I was about a year out of law school. This is 1993. Um, you may remember that's the year that the World Wide, well, you're too young to remember, but that's the year that the World Wide Web became something. It became an existence, and I put up a website. And so that's the early adopter thing. And then I started sending emails to clients and putting out a newsletter in that format. Then I did a blog on the website, and then the podcast evolved as a way of not having to sit down and write, but just to be able to talk into a microphone. And it turns out there's a lot more writing involved in podcasting. So that's one thing I've learned. Planning on the front end is a great time saver for the production part on the back end. So that's another tidbit, I guess I could say I've learned. But really, I think over these years, when I started in podcasting as a podcaster, I realized there wasn't any legal resources. And so I took that as an opportunity to create some and to be a leader, a thought leader, and a teacher in the space. And I think it's the best way to grow your expertise, position yourself as an expert, is just to get out there and speak your mind, say what's going on, and I guess tell your truth to the world, and you'll get followers. And you don't need millions in order to succeed. There's that great book or story, blog post or something about 1,000 true fans. If you can get 1,000 true fans to give you a couple of bucks a month, you're making a decent living. And and more than that, of course. So I guess that's what I've learned is it isn't about fame. It's about just serving and doing well and being as transparent as possible, really.
And I love how you bring up the facts of the misconceptions that are out there, right? The preparation that really goes in, or the writing that really goes in. Because even for this podcast, I tell everyone, I write down the intro, the outro of just what the framework would look like. Obviously, the listeners know I do those key takeaways, and obviously those come up on the fly. And then potential questions, which could take, when you really sit down, think about it, think about how you potentially want to shape conversations or questions or data points that you want to bring up in the show. That can take easily 30 minutes to an hour right there.
Yeah.
Podcasters, hosts like myself, also do initial calls with everyone. So you and I did an initial call to get to know each other, learn about each other's business, see if there's alignment, what we could talk about, and really brainstorm that creative side. There's that time. But I love how you mentioned the fact that there's this time of writing and prep that goes in and should go in on the front end to save you on the back end, and that knowledge, as well as the idea that it isn't about fame. I think a lot of people go, okay, well, if I start a podcast, I'm going to become famous, and it could just supplement what I'm going to be doing the rest of my life. It's about using your voice and making that impact. And a lot of podcasters that are in it for the long term, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, Gordon, is they're not doing it for the fame. They're doing it for the impact they can have. The power to use their voice to share knowledge, to share experiences, to connect with individuals. And that, I think, speaks volumes and will transcend to a growth and success of a podcast tenfold over the individual who's doing it for the fame, who isn't going to prep, who is looking at how much monetarily I can grow it and get short term rather than long term.
Yeah. A couple things that you said that I want to just riff on a little bit. One is that, I talked about all that prep, and you followed up on it. There's a lot of value in working with a team. There's a famous African proverb or something that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I really do believe that having helpers makes sense, and asking for help is sometimes one of the hardest things, especially for entrepreneurs and independent-minded people. But you do have to get people on the team who, frankly, are just better at certain things than you are. Let them shine. Let them live in their sweet spot, and trust them to help you do that prep or the post-production, whatever. And that's a big one. And then, I think that you're right. I mean, some of my friends in the podcasting community are people who have been there even longer than I have, since the first days of podcasting. And, for a lot of us, it started as either a hobby or just some kind of a little fun thing to do to see how this works, a gee whiz kind of technology. But I think you're right. The impact, that influence is an important value. And I don't say that in the sense of influencer, but I said, but podcasters are influencers. Even if you've only got 35 people listening, if you think about it, where else do you get a regular opportunity every week to speak to a room full of 35 people? Unless you're a school teacher, right? So I think that's hugely important, and you have the ability to influence those people just a little bit at a time. Just shift a little thinking, or give them a tip that they then implement, and that turns into something. It's the stone in the pond that sends ripples, or the butterfly effect, where the butterfly flapping its wings turns into a hurricane around the globe on the other side of the globe. I think that's really, really a thing. And that's why I try to do what I do, is just put out the information and give people the tools and information that they can change their little corner of the world. And one by one, we're changing the whole world.
I love it. And I want to dive more into those little tidbits you give through your podcast, but really working with a lot of podcasters, because when I talk to people through my business and consulting, when it comes to podcasting, whether it's starting their own podcast or getting on the right podcast, or they've been doing it for a while and there's things they never thought of. They could be 6 months in and they just never thought thing. A big misconception that I get too when starting to talk to someone about their own podcast is it's only about picking up. I just have to pick up a mic. I could pick up my phone and start recording, could talk to my friends. And words hold weight, words hold value. And there is different things you have to be mindful of, that when you have a microphone in front of you, like you and I both have now, and you're sharing this knowledge about giving accurate information, sharing stories, sharing experiences can help elevate a lot faster than inaccurate data or stat points or all of these things. And those people who are listening are going to take that back and actually go, oh, this is what the information is. And if you're wrong, now you're sharing inaccurate information. So when you work with podcast hosts or individuals come to you about podcast legal advice, what does the initial conversation look like on shining some light on things that people have never even thought of when it comes to podcast?
Well, there are two sides of it. There are some folks who come to me because they have a problem of some sort. They're in a disagreement with their co-host or their partner, or they're having someone is using the same title as their show or something. And in those situations, it's really about diagnosing what the problem is and coming up with the solution to that problem. It might be a trademark registration. It might be a strong letter from someone like me that says, hey, cut it out or else, what we call a nasty gram. And lots of different solutions depending on the problem. But what I love is when people come to me because they're getting ready, or they're looking to do it right in the first place. And that's my saying is, look, yes, anybody can grab a microphone and create a podcast, turn on the YouTube thing and start recording video, whatever. And that's a hobby. That's an amateurish way of doing things. And you might have a little success. Maybe you even have huge success doing that. But I think that people are much more inclined to follow, listen to, take advice, and be influenced by people who take themselves seriously. If you want to be taken seriously, you got to start with yourself and approach things professionally. So my conversation with those folks is, let's look at the structures. Let's build some systems. So a business structure, if you don't already have an LLC or corporation, maybe that's something we need to think about. That will affect how you deal with partners, co-producers, co-hosts, those kinds of things. The team structure that I was talking about, that working with a group, you want to make sure you have good, clear understandings, contracts with all of those folks, so that everybody knows what their job is and what they're supposed to get out of it and who owns what. And so there can't be disputes or fights about that later on. You need to think about the intellectual property. When we're making content, we are making valuable stuff that can live on for quite some time. Who owns it? Who gets to use it? How do they get to use it? Under what circumstances? And how do we protect against somebody using it in a way we don't like or without our permission? So that's the intellectual property structure or strategy. And then you want to monetize, you want to make some money, because even if it's a hobby for you, it's almost more fun when you're making some money, right? And certainly if you're in business and you're thinking of it that way, you got to have a system, a plan for that. And again, that comes down to good contracts, and really have a clear understanding of who your customer is, not just your audience, but your customer. They're not always the same people, and how you're going to reach them, deal with them, engage with them, and make sure you get paid by them. So those are the kinds of things that I'm usually talking to the people who want to become more professional in their approach.
I think, in my personal view, is always I'd rather be prepared than unprepared.
Yeah.
So I think I know I don't know everything, and I go into every experience. And when I started my podcast, of okay, what don't I know?
Mhm.
What are the questions I also don't know to ask? And
Right.
who can I have the conversation with who's going to fill in the holes and help me ask the right questions and really learn and get the right information? And I think so many of us, whether it's starting a podcast or a business or what a passion project,
Yeah.
we're so scared sometimes to say, I don't know this, you're the expert, not me, and I have to take your lead. But sometimes that fear gets in the way of long-term goal achievement, long-term
Yeah.
satisfaction, when you could have not run into that issue with your co-host, not run into an issue with intellectual property, just by having a sit down conversation and saying, what does this look like? So I want to pull the conversation that way a little bit, because I think there's a lot of facets that we can dive into on this realm. The first being, when you do have that co-host and you're deciding, some people get a co-host because it's their best friend and they want to do this endeavor together. They don't necessarily know if they're going to work well together. And then they start doing it and they're like, okay, well, I'm busy on this and the other person's busy on that. How do you make sure everything gets done? So you do something interesting, and I want you to dive into this, of what those conversations are with individuals who do have co-hosts, and try to make sure everyone is happy and long-term partnership is there too.
Well, yeah, I think the thing you're talking about is what I call a podcast prenup, and you have to have the conversation. And yes, it's sometimes hard and sometimes challenging, but if you recognize that what you're going into is going to be something that lasts beyond you, or beyond the time that you and your co-host are working together, you have to know what happens to it at the end of that. What happens if one of us dies, gets disabled, can't do the show, decides we don't want to do the show, gets too busy, or puts in more money than the other to the venture at the early days? How are we going to figure that out? And leaving it to chance and to trust is fine, I guess, to a certain extent. But if you're planning to go far, you want to make sure you've got that stuff figured out so that you don't get stuck along the way. You get flat tire alongside the highway with somebody getting unhappy or bent out of shape about things. So I actually have a questionnaire that I offer people for free. It's at podcastprenup.com. And you just download this sort of checklist worksheet of the kinds of questions to ask and things to think about that you can then use to get a written document put together, either by hiring a lawyer or finding a form or a template, or just writing something from scratch. But something is better than nothing in this arena, because you want to make sure that everybody out there can determine what your intentions are or were at the time that you started the thing. So yeah, it's fine to be partners and equals and all of that, but there's no such true thing as equal in business. People do different amounts of work and different amounts of expect different amounts of return on their investment.
So when someone comes to you and they are starting to see those holes that you talk about with a co-host, how do you kind of engage that conversation with them and say, okay, here's what I'm seeing, here's potentially how to have the first step in a conversation, or what we should be doing, as not just a lawyer yourself, but someone who actually knows the game as a podcast host?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't like to stand in the role of the marriage counselor or therapist, and I don't like to offer too much advice on the interpersonal part of it. But what I can do is I can say, look, here's how a lot of folks do it, or here's how some people with your particular concerns might address this. And usually I'm talking to one person, so my client, who my client is very clear. It's my job to protect and advocate for them. So I'm going to say, this is what's best for you. Mm-hmm. They may turn around and say, well, yeah, but that's really not fair to her because she's my co-host. She's my partner. We got started together. So let's adjust it. And then okay, what about this? What about that? And that's sort of how we do it. Most of the conversations that the clients are having after a consultation with me is happening in writing. It's a draft of a contract. I'd like you to sign this. It's better if they've talked about it first, if possible. If it's a real butting heads kind of a clash, then oftentimes it's two lawyers communicating with each other. And that sometimes actually works better because we don't have the emotion and the heat in the situation there. So that's another thing. Don't hesitate to get someone in to be on your side and advocate for you if you are in one of these situations, because you wouldn't perform heart surgery on yourself, and sometimes you just need that outside expert opinion on things.
And you brought up a good point too, and it doesn't matter whether it's a lawyer like yourself, a friend, a coworker, a boss, whoever it might be. Sometimes we need that third party to sit there and listen and to actually host the conversation with individuals who are level-headed, who are seeing a different perspective, and just either watching something unfold or hearing both sides of the stories with that outside perspective, who might not have the same emotional ties to the situation, the people, whatever it might be, that can say, okay, well, we should look at it this way, or have you thought about having the conversation this way, or I'm hearing this and that, and I think we need to bridge this. Now, for you as well, when you're working with people on podcasting, there's sometimes no co-host. So that problem gets solved. Like you and I, we don't have co-hosts, so we don't have to worry about that part.
Well, I do have a co-host on my big show, Entertainment Law Update, and we'd had that conversation before we ever recorded the first episode. I said, listen, this is going to be my show. You're the co-host. I don't have any plans to bring anybody else on, but just to be clear, it's me. It's mine, and I'm doing all the work. And she's totally cool with that. So,
and it works. And that's the thing. It's having the conversation, like you just said in the beginning, that really makes it work, and the understanding and expectations laid out. But for you, when you also speak to podcast hosts who are like, okay, I'm starting out, or they've already been doing it for 6 months, and they haven't thought about necessarily the aspects of laying out this LLC or some of the other things that come into podcasting that can really make it flourish, right? Make it grow and sustainable. What are some of the most common things you come across when people are starting out or have been in podcasting that they just don't know? And can you share some of those insights of what some things might be to think about?
Wow. I would say the most common is the dispute between co-hosts or co-producers, or, ownership fights. Obviously there's lots of things where someone, uses a piece of music that they shouldn't have, and then they have to deal with the owner of the music and either take the episodes down or edit the episodes or pay a big number to license the music. That's very common, although we don't hear about it much because it just happens quickly and it's done. Legal disputes or disputes that might brew into a legal dispute. It's the co-host stuff. It's you're using a title that's too close to the one I have already been using for my show, or your title is too generic. I'm going to use one just like it. Depends on which side you're on there. What other disputes? And getting paid disputes. When the show starts to make money, the co-host might be, hey, where's my share? Or the advertiser is saying, well, I'm not getting what I thought I was paying for. Or I have a situation with one client where they thought they had a deal for $1,000 an episode, but it was actually $1,000 per podcast. And that meant that the sponsor thought it was something different, and that it was going to be one payment for like the whole year of the podcast. And they ended up having a pretty big brouhaha over it. It's not. It's hard to point to anything that's the most common because all these things come up from time to time.
For you, following up on that,
Yeah.
what has been the most rewarding or aha moment for you as you really have started to work and grow with podcast hosts along their journey as well?
I would say the biggest aha is realizing how much either absence of or misinformation is out there. And so it's been my mission for a long time now to educate and inform and provide enough knowledge that people can act from an informed point of view without necessarily having to hire a lawyer every time. And I try to offer, obviously, I do the done for you services where I'm just hire me and I'll take care of it for you. But I also want to provide information either at the free level or courses on how to do things or forms and templates to guide the way and all those kinds of things. So that's why I try to put out so much information out there. So there's something for everybody at every budget level and level of hands-on that they want to be.
And I think that's a really important aspect to understand. And there's two now that I'm saying this that I think are equally important. The aspect of wanting to share as much information and debunk the lack of information or wrong information that's out there. And I understand your feeling with it because when I talk to hosts or potential hosts or people who want to get on podcasts, it's a lot of, well, I could just get on podcasts, any podcast. And I'm like, no, you can't just not any host is going to have you on their show, right?
Right.
Not every conversation you can just make. It's about the quality, not the quantity, and actually being able to hold that conversation on the topic.
Yeah.
It's the things like, oh, well, I can just like sign up for this feed and get my podcast out. Well, the account you're making is not actually going to get your podcast on iTunes and Spotify.
Right.
I just had this conversation with a big time producer who is now starting their own podcast, and amazing individual, but he's going from television and movies into making a podcast. And he said something to me and I was like, that's not what you need. You need this. And he goes, well, Google told me to sign up for this account and I'd be set. And I go, yes, it's the lack of information that's out there that really even drives me. And it can send me down a rabbit hole of sometimes just going, there's these 1,000 things that are not being discussed or just is out there and is telling you this is the right resource when it isn't. So I love that you really try to fill those gaps and fill them in a way where they can be accessible in whatever monetary form or whatever stage someone is in their journey, but also provide the correct information that they need. And for you, what has been the biggest thing that you've learned through podcasting that has also helped you in providing legal services now that you've gone on the journey yourself, that you can actually say, okay, I experienced this, I learned it, and now I can help you through it and really I've been there. I understand.
Well, I will say, I think that the biggest thing or the most important lesson I've learned is humility. Not to take myself quite as seriously as I used to, because everybody makes a mistake, and my kids have helped me a lot with this too. Is they'll listen, or when I'm listening back to an episode or something, they'll say, "Dad, you said 242 times in that episode," or things like that. So even the experts aren't always the expert on everything, and really recognizing the limits of my knowledge and boundaries of my expertise has been important as well. But also not letting that stop me, and certainly not succumbing to imposter syndrome, which is a tremendous thing in podcasting and lots of other industries, where you know a lot about what it is you know about, and yet it doesn't feel like a lot because it's so built into what you're doing. So when you get on a microphone or camera to talk about it, it may feel like you're just sharing things everybody knows. And so who am I to be teaching this stuff? But in fact, not everybody knows it. And we have to remember, yes, I really am an expert. And being able to stand in my spotlight that way, put myself out in front center stage, that's another important lesson I've had.
And I think it's something that we can all sometimes take for granted,
Mm-hmm.
what you just mentioned. And the second you said I'm like, I'm probably said that 3 or 4 times at least throughout, because it's something we all inherently do.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in podcasting, it's a conversation. So those little things you can't always control, or it just comes out and you got to keep moving through.
Yeah.
And that's something too that I learned very early on. When I started my podcast, I was like, okay, I got to prep because it's got to be perfect. When I read the intro, it has to be perfect. And it took my 2 top producers, Ben and Dennis, who are the heads of the company I use. And Dennis owns the company, Ben's second in command. And they're like, you're doing way better than you think for your very first recording. And it sounds better when it's natural. You don't have to hit all these points exactly like you're thinking or redo it, because people feel that. And I think when we watch television and acting, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, Gordon, we know it's being acted out. We know there's all this prep, recordings for 16, 17 hours a day to get that down, and possibly for months to get it down to that hour and a half, 2 hours. So
Yeah.
a lot of people think, okay, I got to record for 2 hours and snip it down to 30 minutes. It has to be perfect. We have to ask these questions in this order, whatever it might be. But it ends up coming out and character and personality and connectiveness when it isn't like that.
Yeah, it's true. And, those actors, they do prepare. And again, it's that got to do the prep work up front. And part of the preparing is knowing that you're going to go in and shoot the same scene 12 times and you got to bring it all 12 times. But when they go on a talk show late at night going on Jimmy Kimmel or something, they are not doing that kind of prep. They have talking points, of course, things they want to cover, but it's not perfect. You'll see them, say something inadvertent or make a funny face expression or something, and it doesn't get fixed in post. It just goes out on the air. And so different formats, different approaches to things. But I think the authenticity of what we do as podcasters and YouTubers is one of the things that attracts the audience to us, is they get to know us in a way that you and I don't know George Clooney and Julia Roberts and Sandra Bullock. And, I can't think of any of the actual current big stars, but we're never going to know them that way, even with a glimpse here and there. So I think our audiences really want to know us in a more authentic way. And that's really about you still bring your expertise, but also be yourself.
For you on your podcast, what has been your favorite part of that journey, as well as the more recently, I won't make you go all the way back, but more recently, your most passionate advice or conversation you've had on the show?
Well, the one show that I do, let me tell you a little bit about the 2 shows. The Entertainment Law Update I've been doing this one for 15 years, and it's a monthly roundup of legal news and stories in the entertainment law space. And it's me and another lawyer, and we do our thing. We have a little banter back and forth, and we've become good friends because of doing the show. She's not somebody I knew before we started the show. I actually found out about her through Twitter when I asked, I'm looking for a co-host who meets these criteria, and she was highly recommended. So there's that ability for community building. I think that's really cool. The other show that I do is just me giving the tip. It's called Legit Podcast Pro, and I do a YouTube live stream every week that I then take the audio and publish as a podcast as well. And there, it's me sort of talking about the things that I want to talk about that I think the audience is interested in. And so the data, I'd say the most important lesson I've gotten there is that I have to pay attention to the data. I can make an episode about my favorite subject, but if it's only my favorite subject, nobody cares. So I do have to listen to what the audience wants. And again, it's just about being in service and providing something of value to those folks. So I may have sidestepped your question a little bit. The most important conversation I've had, I don't know. It's with me myself usually.
Well, that's okay because you answered it in a way that shows that you are having conversations that matter to you.
Yeah.
But the way you gauge what also matters to you is by seeing what matters to the listener at that point in time and what is on their hot plate.
Yeah. So I guess what I would say is I sort of think of my show as a conversation with the listener. And again, bringing that authenticity and being conversational and giving them something that I think they want to hear about or need to hear about.
Amazing. So, Gordon, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find because I've got a name that nobody else has. So you can search for me on the web. GordonFiremark.com takes you to sort of my products and services and courses and things like that. The law firm website, firemark.com. So search for me that way. Social media, GFiremark gets you almost everywhere. And yeah, look for me in the podcast apps. You'll find me.
Thank you, Gordon, for all of your insight today.
It's been a true pleasure. Thank you so much, Olivia. I'm glad to be here.
It was a pleasure. And I feel like we are both so passionate about podcasting and not just our journeys, but other people's journeys and sharing that information. I think there were so many different insightful things that you said, things that we can all think about, whether it is within the podcasting space and having your own podcast or in life and business. And it's been a pure pleasure. And I could go on with just the different things we can talk about. So thank you so much. And a few of those key takeaways from today's conversation include stepping out of the box. Sometimes it is about saying, okay, this does not fit what I'm looking to do. What are the things and how can I make it my own? Like Gordon said, he loved theater. He was the behind the scenes guy, and that is why he went into doing it in college. But he did realize that in college, the programs were about being on the stage, and he didn't want that. So he went into radio. And then it was the guidance and those aha moments that led him into law and mixing both. So stepping out of the box and understanding that sometimes creating that box the way you want it to look like and not how everyone else thinks the box should look like is the best path for you to go down, as well as have a willingness to trust yourself. Gordon mentioned that, and I cannot agree more that sometimes we let fear stand in the way of really understanding and trusting the path that we are confident on going down. So Gordon mentioned earlier as well, take that few moments, sit down, meditate, write it down, maybe, journal, whatever that space you can truly connect and brainstorm and get your thoughts out is, do it to be able to really go, okay, I trust myself, I hear myself, and these are the steps I'm going to use to move forward, as well as keep your eyes out on the horizon to see what's coming. Gordon has done this throughout his whole career, and as the industry has continuously changed, he has kept his eye out for that new technology, that new things that's coming down the line, how the industry is changing. No matter where you work, what you do, what your passions are, always keep an eye out for those things that are those small shifts or big shifts that are coming down the horizon, as well as planning on the front end saves you a lot of time on the back end. Again, Gordon mentioned this when it comes to podcast prep and the importance of podcast prep and just putting together a whole show, but it can really relate to anything we're doing, whether it's professionally or planning for an event, a party with your friends, going out to dinner. Making sure those small things are in place on the front end will save you so much time and frustration on the back end. As well as if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with the team. It's so important to understand that you can't do everything by yourself. And who are those people that you are going to have on your team that can communicate, who see your vision, who are going to be the experts and so much more. As well as, do you have a podcast prenup with your co-host? I love this idea that Gordon has come up with and his resources on his website and just everything he's doing, because so many podcast hosts who go into podcasting with a podcast host never think about the long term, the different hiccups that could come up, and have those difficult conversations in the beginning. So if you're that podcast host, definitely go to Gordon's website or reach out to him about that podcast prenup, because you don't want to be 3 years from now and start having all those hiccups and wishing that you had the conversation. And last but not least, don't let limitations stop you. Acknowledge them and push through. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Gordon Firemark. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.